Megadeth, in addition to being one of the most legendary thrash metal bands in history, is also known to be a factory of some of the best guitarists in the world of metal. So today, just like we did with the Megadeth drummers in a previous episode, let's take a look at the history of all of them. Here you go. Super quick guys, as always, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Metal Pilgrim channel is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. Back in April of 1983, being freshly dismissed from Metallica, Dave Mustaine returned to Los Angeles and soon founded a new band called Fallen Angels, featuring Robbie McKinney as a second guitarist, whom, by the way, he knew from way before as their girlfriends were actually friends at that time. And so McKinney, who by the way called himself Robert Cromwell, was a Guitar Institute of Technology musician, and it was actually him who showed Dave a couple of interesting solos and riffs he'd been working on, which later on were used by Dave Mustaine on Looking Down the Cross from Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. Yet still, the Fallen Angels lineup, just like the name of this band, were rather short-lived. They never had a drummer, never recorded anything, and never even had a chance to play their stuff live. And even Dave himself admits now that it was Megadeth in its most larval form. And so soon after Fallen Angels broke up, if you even call it that, the real story of Megadeth as we know it today actually begun. 5 days after their high school graduation, two friends, David Ellefson and Greg Handevidt, packed up and rode to Hollywood, jumped in David's van and drove southwest to Hollywood, aiming to enroll in the Guitar Institute of Technology. And there in California, Dave and Greg moved into an apartment just below Dave Mustaine's. And so one day they simply just knocked on his door. Yet Dave, who was still on edge after being dismissed from Metallica, thought that they were just journalists trying to find out something about Metallica. Yet after a couple of years, they realized that they do share the same passion for heavy metal. And that's when Megadeth started. With Handevidt in the lineup, they recorded a rough demo in a friend's living room, early takes of Mechanics, Rattlehead, and others that would later appear on Megadeth's first two records. But Greg's time in the band was actually rather short. After one of the early Megadeth's classic drunken rage blow-ups, Greg was simply kicked out of the band, and even though he did come back for a short stunt afterwards, soon enough he left for good, partly because he just found out he became a father back in Minnesota, and he chose family over metal, which in my opinion is just as respectable of an exit from a band as one can imagine. After Greg's departure, Megadeth had a bit of a trouble finding his replacement. And so for their very first ever live gigs, nobody else but the legendary Kerry King stepped in. And that's where things got wild. Dave could play Kerry a riff once, and Kerry would nail it back instantly. And Ellefson still, to this very day, I guess half-jokingly actually calls Kerry King the best rhythm guitarist Megadeth has ever had. And the whole fact that he was actually a Mustaine fan, as he had seen him together with Metallica before that, did help him quite a lot.
I was lucky enough to see Metallica with Mustaine. And I say that because it's just a rare thing to be able to say that.
And so overall, together with Megadeth, Kerry King played 5 live shows. Yet there was a little problem, as simultaneously with that, Slayer had just dropped their iconic Show No Mercy. And since Kerry wasn't about to be just a hired gun, and as much as he liked playing together with Dave, he did decide to go on his own journey, as his heart was always in Slayer. So after those several gigs, he bowed out and concentrated on the band, which would eventually make him a thrash metal legend of his own. After Kerry King left, Megadeth tightened up their trio lineup: Mustaine, Ellefson, and a drummer named Geir Samuelson. And it was actually Geir who brought in his friend and a former bandmate from the New Yorkers, Chris Poland, who wasn't really your typical metal guitarist. In fact, he wasn't really a metal guitarist at all. At least not at first. Chris came out of the jazz fusion scene, and his playing style was shaped by a childhood injury that severed a tendon in his left index finger. And it was actually that limitation that would eventually lead him to develop the now iconic slippery legato heavy style, which together with his jazz influenced phrasing, which was so fluid it felt like fusion wrapped in fire, which made him a perfect guitarist for Megadeth's evolving sound. Interestingly enough, Poland actually saw Megadeth live as a power trio, and that's exactly when he realized that he wants to be in this band. According to him, he rented a room near their rehearsal space and blasted his guitar through the walls until Mustaine noticed him, and that's what helped him accomplish his mission. And so pretty much right away, Poland joined Megadeth officially, and it was with him on board that the band recorded their 1985 debut Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. Yet sadly, very shortly after this release, Chris actually had to leave Megadeth. Well, for the first of the several times he would do that. And as we all know, because of the drug issues. And so for Megadeth's first North American tour, which came shortly after, he was replaced by Mike Albert, a veteran player with a background in Zappa's Ruben and the Jets and Latin rockers El Chicano. Interestingly enough, Albert actually never really became an official permanent band member at Megadeth, and just in October of 1985, Chris Poland actually returned to the band, just in time to record their second studio album, Peace Sells But Who's Buying? Yes, that same record, which was released in September of 1986, and would eventually become a genre-defining record for thrash metal. But in the true Megadeth fashion, by the time Peace Sells tour wrapped up, Chris Poland left the band, and this time for good. And most Megadeth fans of course know that Megadeth accused Chris of selling the band's equipment to buy drunks, which is a rather interesting story, and if you would like me to release a special episode about it, I'd be more than happy to do that, because there is actually quite a lot to talk about there. But anyways, interestingly enough, years later, despite everything, Dave Mustaine and Chris Poland would actually reunite. For 2004's The System Has Failed, but back in the 80s, that bridge was completely burned. And so right after Chris, Megadeth turned to Jay Reynolds, guitarist for speed metal band Malice, as their next hire. But as Megadeth started working on their third studio album, another guitarist was brought in, Jeff Young, who actually happened to be Reynolds' teacher, and it was actually Reynolds who brought him into the band. Jay wanted his teacher to help him transcribe the solos from the previous albums, but after watching Jeff deciphering Chris Poland's solos from the second album in less than half an hour, Dave Mustaine quickly realized who the next Megadeth guitarist should actually be. And so it would eventually be Jeff Young, who would record together with Megadeth their third studio album, So Far, So Good, So What. Yet, once again, not stay in the band for too long, as by year's end, Dave Mustaine actually had to fire him also. This time for a very legit reason, by the way, as according to Dave Mustaine, Jeff was actually hitting on his girlfriend, and this is not something you do in a band, right? In February of 1990, Megadeth brought in a guitarist who would define an era, and would actually to this very day become the band's longest serving, most recorded, and arguably the most iconic six-stringer, Marty Friedman. Unlike the Berkley types before and after him, Marty was actually almost entirely self-taught, with a deep love for neoclassical playing and exotic scales. He grew up in Washington, D.C. and had already made serious noise in the bands like Deuce, Hawaii, and most famously Cacophony, a shred duo project with Jason Backer that simply melted minds and decks across the scene. And by the way, before joining Megadeth, he also happened to play in a Christian rock band Shout, and even already dropped his own solo record, the now legendary Dragon's Kiss, in 1988. And it was when Friedman joined Megadeth that something simply clicked. And not just musically, but historically, as it was the beginning of what, to this very day, most of the Megadeth fans actually still call the golden era of this band. With Marty on guitar, Megadeth dropped 5 records. Rust in Peace in 1990, Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia, Cryptic Writings, and Risk in 1999, with the first 2 being the untouchable thrash classics, the middle leaning hard into melodic territory, and Risk, living up to its name. And together with Megadeth, Marty Friedman would stay all the way until January of 2000, when it finally became clear that he and Dave Mustaine were actually looking in slightly different directions. Mustaine wanted to get back to Megadeth's metal roots. Marty, on the other hand, was more interested in pushing into modern sounds, even flirting with nu metal elements, saying that Megadeth didn't really know what was actually happening in the rock scene at the time, and claiming that the band wasn't adventurous enough for his taste. And so, shortly after, Marty left Megadeth. This time with absolutely no drama, with absolutely no hard feelings or bad mouthing for each other, which I guess is exactly why, to this very day, every Megadeth fan simply love the legendary Marty Friedman. Yet after Marty Friedman walked away in January of 2000, it didn't actually take Megadeth long to find a replacement for him. And so, right away in January of 2000, less than 2 weeks after Marty's departure, Megadeth already announced the name of his successor, who would of course become Al Pitrelli. In the early 80s, Pitrelli was a Berkeley college student, but quickly dropped out. After that, he worked in New York as a session musician and guitar teacher, and just like pretty much every Megadeth's guitarist before him, his journey as a musician started far away from metal, as his first major credit was actually playing on Michael Bolton's 1983 single Fool's Game. Yeah, that one. But don't be fooled, Pitrelli could play anything. And before joining Megadeth, he already played with everyone, from Alice Cooper to Asia, worked as a session guy across pop and rock, and even joined the Snyder's post-Twisted Sister band Widowmaker. From 1998 to 2001, he was also a part of King Diamond's orbit, and more importantly, a key member of Sabotage and the rising Trans-Siberian Orchestra, where he worked not only as a guitarist, but would eventually also become a musical director. And so together with Pitrelli, Megadeth wrapped up the Risk Tour and recorded their next record, The World Needs a Hero, released in May of 2001. And it was this record that marked the transition of Megadeth to a heavier and more raw form. And you know what? Al Pitrelli, in my opinion, was actually a perfect guitarist for it. Yet, sadly, the party didn't last long, as in April of 2002, Dave suffered a serious nerve injury in his left arm, that kind that made it playing guitar impossible, and with that he officially disbanded Megadeth, and parted ways with Al Pitrelli. And yeah, back in the day, it actually seemed like it was the end of one of the most legendary thrash metal bands in history. But we all, of course, know that it wasn't.
Sometimes you gotta slow down and take in the things that are beautiful in nature.
Oh yeah.
You're so caught up in the rat race that you just forget after a while.
So when Megadeth came roaring back in October of 2004, of course for their Blackmail the Universe World Tour, they brought in a new face with them. Canadian shredder Glenn Drover, who grew up in Ottawa and was actually heavily influenced by, well, Dave Mustaine himself. His style sat somewhere between precision thrash and neoclassical thrash, not far from Marty Friedman's lane, but at the same time with a much colder and more mechanical edge. Before Megadeth, Glenn had already made a name for himself in Eidolon, a power thrash band he co-founded with his brother Sean Drover, who also just happened to be a Megadeth drummer at that time. And just like Al Pitrelli, from 1991 to 2001, was actually working together with King Diamond. So yeah, by the time he joined Megadeth, he already did have a name for himself. With Glenn in the band, Megadeth recorded United Abominations in 2007, a solid return to form that saw the band re-entering the top 10 of the Billboard charts, and he actually even helped co-write in the song Never Walk Alone, A Call to Arms, which became the only Megadeth song with his name in the credits. But sadly enough, in 2008, he announced his departure from Megadeth. And just like Marty Friedman, he did so without any drama or bad-mouthing whatsoever, and actually did that on his own terms. The reason was rather simple. Constant touring was taking a toll, and he wanted to spend more time with his family, which is virtually impossible when you work in a band of such a caliber. And here, guys, I just want to take a super short break and just thank all my patrons and all the YouTube channel members. Guys, know that it is thanks to you and thanks to the coffee you didn't drink and, donated it to support this channel that I am able to release these videos amidst the hardest times for my country. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you to each and every one of you and everyone who purchases Metal Pilgrim merch. On January 14th of 2008, Megadeth introduced their newest addition to the band, Chris Broderick, a technical monster from Lakewood, Colorado, and in my opinion, one of the most versatile musicians this band has ever had. As Broderick wasn't just shredder, he was a trained multi-instrumentalist. By the time he hit his teens, he was already playing electric guitar, classical guitar, piano, and violin, and later on graduated from University of Denver's Lamont School of Music with a degree in classical performance before starting at the Musicians Institute. So yeah, he wasn't just a nobody, and definitely wasn't just a regular shredder. But what truly set him apart from everybody else was his love for flamenco. Players like Paco de Lucia and Paco Peña were just as influential for him as Marty Friedman or Jason Becker, and that blend of elegance and aggression would eventually become his signature style. Before Megadeth, Broderick was best known for his long run with Jack Panzer, one of the pillars of US power metal, with whom he recorded 5 studio albums, as well as played live together with Nevermore, filling in for Jeff Loomis without breaking a sweat. So when Dave Mustaine finally discovered him and brought him to Megadeth, he compared that experience to Ozzy Osbourne finally meeting Randy Rhoads, which, in my opinion, says it all. With Broderick on board, Megadeth entered a new era of technical tightness and eventually recorded 3 studio albums, those being Endgame, 13, and Super Collider. And it was Chris who would eventually take part in one of the band's most iconic and historic moments, the Big 4 tour alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. But in November of 2014, Broderick announced his departure from Megadeth because of creative differences, which, in opinion of most Megadeth fans, actually translated into normal language as him wanting more creative input than Megadeth was willing to give. After Chris Broderick left in 2014, Dave Mustaine tried to do the impossible, resurrect the legendary Rust in Peace lineup. Yet, as we all know, Marty Friedman decided to pass on the offer, and Dave looked far beyond American shores, bringing in nobody else but Kiko Loureiro, who, to this very day, despite leaving the band several years ago, actually remains the most beloved guitarist this band has ever had. Well, if you were into power metal before then, you of course already knew Kiko's name, as it was him who was the longtime guitarist of São Paulo's Angra, a band he joined at just 18 years old, helping shape their neoclassical meets progressive sound. And by then, in Brazil, Kiko wasn't just a shredder. He was already a guitar hero. Mustaine first met him back in 2007 during a Burn magazine photo shoot in Japan. And although he didn't know much about Kiko at that time, since everyone was raving about him, after Dave saw him play live, he realized what all the fuss was about. And so, years later, when the Megadeth slot opened up, Dave knew exactly whom he wanted to bring on board. With Kiko on board, Megadeth released Dystopia in 2016 and The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead in 2022. And Dystopia, which by the way you can see behind me, wasn't just a return to form. It was actually a huge success, which brought Megadeth their first and, for now, only Grammy Awards win, with the title track taking Best Metal Performance in 2017.
And the Grammy goes to Dystopia, Megadeth, yes!
And it was Kiko, of course, who brought the new energy to the band. Disciplined, inventive, and unshakably precise. But in September of 2023, which, by the way, if you wanna feel old, happened 2 years ago already, Kiko decided to step back from Megadeth. And a couple of months later, in November, he extended the break through 2014, eventually making it clear that he wasn't coming back to the band. And as sad as that story actually is, if it was not for him, who knows? Maybe Dave Mustaine would never have found the guy who came after him, and the guy with whom it looks like Megadeth will close their story. When Kiko Loureiro decided to step away from Megadeth, he only had two suggestions for his replacement, one of whom was Marty Friedman, and the other one, of course, Teemu Mäntysaari, a Finnish guitarist known for his work with Wintersun, whom he right away saw as a perfect fit for Megadeth. Born in Tampere, Finland, Teemu didn't start off as a music prodigy. He was more into sports, playing soccer, ice hockey and floorball, until he picked up an acoustic guitar at the age of 12. Which, if you think about it, is actually quite late. But nevertheless, in 2004 he joined Wintersun, the melodic death metal brainchild of Jari Mäenpää, formerly of Ensiferum, and since then he's played on all their studio albums, and actually to this very day remains an official band member. When Megadeth hit the road in 2023, Teemu was first brought in as a session player for the North American tour. But after Kiko made his exit official, Teemu was promoted to full-time guitarist, making him the 13th guitarist in the Megadeth history. And it looks like the last one this band will ever have. And you know what? In my opinion, both in terms of live playing and in terms of what we have already heard on the upcoming last studio album from Megadeth, he is actually a perfect fit for this band. And something tells me that the end of Megadeth might just be the beginning for Teemu Mäntysaari. But anyways, that's it. These are all the guitarists who ever worked for a substantial amount of time together with Dave Mustaine at a little project called Megadeth. And which of those is your favorite one? Please let us know in the comments. And as well as whether now that we have done this exercise with drummers and guitarists, we should do the same video about bassists Dave Mustaine worked with together on Megadeth. Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!